You guys ever see somebody throw up on a TEDx stage before? Hopefully you won't. Um, my talk, as an aside before I even start, my talk is about depression, and I am currently in a depression right now. And if you are familiar with it, then you're probably familiar with that um, exhausted brain fog that makes you unable to remember anything at all, which is the reason why I have brought my notes out with me. Um, it's ugly, but honestly, so is depression sometimes. So fuck it. Um, okay. So, hello. I just want to start by saying that first off, this is not my real hair. Um, I have a really severe anxiety disorder, and it makes me sweat profusely, as you can probably tell. And this ponytail works like a terrible mop to soak up all the sweat. And additionally, if I totally fuck this up, I can just take the hair off and be like a totally different person. So everyone wins. I am best known for being a storyteller. Stories can change the world. The things that we share can affect our lives and the lives of others. So I'm going to tell you a couple of stories. The first is the story of the folder of 24. So about 10 years ago, I shared publicly on my blog for the first time about my struggles with mental illness. Before, I had mainly written sort of silly things about what it's like to pretend to be a grown up when you don't know what a grown up looks like. And I felt like I was creating a false history, like I was lying, um, and like I should be ashamed of myself for not sharing the things that were really going on. So I did share slowly about my chronic depression, my severe anxiety disorder. I talked about the personality disorder that I have that makes me hate myself, and by extension, this speech. I talked about my struggles with self harm and suicidal ideation. It was not easy, it's still not easy, um, but I did it. And some people distanced themselves from me, and some people used being crazy against me because they were scared or they were angry or they're just assholes. There's a lot of assholes out there. Um, but the biggest response that I got was from people who said, "Oh, I thought I was the only one." So I have this folder that I look at whenever I start to think maybe my life isn't going in the right direction. And it's called the folder of 24 because it has 24 letters that I got from people who were actively in the process of planning their suicide, but decided instead to get help, not because of what I wrote, but because they saw thousands of people in the comment section saying, "Oh, me too. I also feel alone. I also feel broken. I am completely fucked up, and my friends and family would be so much better off without me." And they read that and they thought, that can't possibly be right. And then they thought, well, if it's not right for them, maybe it's not right for me either. Maybe these are just the lies that depression is telling me. That's what it does, by the way, depression. It lies impossibly well. And that's the reason why we have to tell these stories, because it gives us a way to see through these lies. So I wrote about the folder of 24 a couple of years ago, and now when I do book signings, people come up to me in line and they whisper, "I'm 25." There are so many 25s. And I often wonder if the people in those comment section have any idea how many lives they changed by sharing their words, their stories, even anonymously. So I want to tell you another story about my great-great-grandmother, Lily, I never met her. She died in the 50s, but when I was doing my family tree, um, I found out that she died in a mental institution in the town where I grew up. And her death certificate said that she died of a heart attack, but it said that the contributing factors were mental disorders and psychosis. And I thought, how does psychosis cause a heart attack? I had no idea. So I asked my mom, and she didn't know anything about it because Lily was sort of a secret that was kept. So unfortunately, Lily's story is lost to us. But I was able to do some research about the hospital where she died, and I found out a lot of really strange treatments that happened there, or they were strange to me. At the time, they were pretty standard. They used electroshock and electroconvulsive therapy, which is actually used today with some really good results. But in the 50s, it was pretty barbaric and experimental. This hospital used insulin therapy. They would put patients into diabetic comas over and over again to try to reset their brain. They used fever therapy, artificially raising the temperature of the patient to, I don't know what they were trying to do, burn something away. And then they used hydrotherapy, which I was like, oh, like a lovely bubble baths. But in fact, hydrotherapy meant wrapping patients in freezing cold, wet towels or strapping them into baths for hours or even a day. And in a lot of cases, it meant spraying them down with high pressure hoses to try to shock them. And unsurprisingly, a lot of the patients, including my great grandmother, didn't survive the treatment. Um, that one is not a happy story, but Lily's story isn't over because we still struggle with so many of the same things. I can trace mental illness in 4 of the generations that precede me. The illness is not going away. But the treatment of it is getting better. And a big part of why it's getting better is because we're finally talking about it. This treatment isn't happening in dark rooms with no windows. We aren't shuttering away the people who suffer. We are listening and we are talking, and it's making a difference. So last year, I was in a really bad place mentally. I have what's called treatment resistant depression. So, spoiler alert, not a lot of treatment. Um, but I heard about this thing called TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation. And basically, you're strapped into a chair for 40 hours with a magnet on your head. It feels like a woodpecker is tapping into your skull. Um, it doesn't hurt, but it's not comfortable, and it feels absolutely ridiculous. It feels like something that should not possibly work, but it did work. It didn't cure my depression, but it helped in a way that medication and therapy alone, which I still depend on, um, couldn't do just on their own. And the only reason why I was convinced to try in the first place is because I saw all these people online who were talking about the treatment, both good and bad, and I thought, well, if they can do it, maybe I'm worth the treatment too. Maybe I'm worth fighting for that. And that was a really good thing. And a year later, when I was in another deep depressive episode, I found myself back in that chair again for another 40 hours. But this time the magnet was in a slightly different place. And the reason why was because in just the last year, enough patients had shared their data with each other and online and with their doctors that the doctors had had enough data that they could say, you know what we found is 1.5 inches over here seems to make a really big difference. And it works better. And I shared my story of having TMS on my blog, even though it felt absolutely ridiculous. And some of my readers had it. And it worked for some of them. It didn't work for everybody, but even for the people that it didn't work for, they were able to see that they were worth fighting for treatment. They were able to see that what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for everybody, but that while the treatment may have failed them, they didn't fail the treatment, that they were worthy of continuing to fight to find something that worked for them. They saw that their data, their stories, that they were used in order to make treatment better for the next generation of patients. And most importantly, they saw that they were not alone. That's a really important thing. They heard the stories of the people who walk before them on that same dark path. And they shared tools and tricks. And with any luck, they were given the opportunity to share their story and to break the stigma of mental illness. Not everyone is in the position to share their story. And it's okay if you don't. It is your story. Whether you decide to tell it or you decide to keep it, it is completely up to you. But I encourage you to share it if you can. Maybe your story is about mental illness. Maybe it's about abuse. Maybe it's about violence or redemption or victory. Maybe your story doesn't have an ending yet. But whatever it is, I want to hear it. And I'm not alone. It is only through radical honesty and authenticity that we can see how far we've come and how far we still have to go. You can change the world in ways you cannot possibly imagine by sharing your story. So start small. Tell your friend, tell a family member, write your story on a piece of paper, stick it inside of a library book. Stand on a stage and shout your shameful family secrets as you sweat into your fake hair. There are a million ways to do it, and all of them are the right way. Share your story so that others will share theirs, because the world is listening. Thank you.